Hello and welcome back to COVID-19 updates. Today's video I'm going to be talking about, is it time we learn to live with the virus? The constant mantra is that the virus must be suppressed and contained. But how do you do this when people can be infectious without knowing they have it? Where can it be passed on silently because people do not develop symptoms? The nation has been brought to a standstill, once at immense cost the economy, education and health more generally. And now with cases rising, there is constant threat of more and more restrictions being imposed. But are we fighting a losing battle? Do we instead now learn to live with the virus? It's utter chaos now. Professor Carl Heneghan, the head of the Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine at Oxford University, says the current situation is utter chaos with the constant stream of new restrictions and schools sending whole year groups home when just one person tests positive. All this at a time when the level of infection is still low. This, Professor Heneghan says, is the consequence of trying to suppress the virus. Instead, he argues we should just accept what it is, stay and try to minimise the risks, while balancing against the consequences of the actions we take. In particular, he concerned that the COVID test is actually so sensitive it's picking up what is effectively dead virus as it spots traces of it months after the person has stopped being infectious. We need to slow down our thinking. But every time the government sees a rise in cases, it seems to panic, he said. Hospital admissions, not cases. The argument put forward by Professor Heneghan and a number of other experts is that more weight needs to put on disease rather than cases. While hospital admissions have started rising, they are still incredibly low compared to the spring, and increase is much more gradual than it was. Here is a photo of the current hospital admissions. So as you can see, it was very high in the middle of March, April, May kind of time. That was the hospital admissions. But even though the cases are actually a lot higher now, the 326 hospital admissions is the current rolling 7-day average. But although the cases is a lot higher now, they may not actually be as high as we think, because the cases were saying that about 4, 5, 6,000 in March, April, May, June, that type of time. But actually there were probably hundreds of thousands of cases, it's just the testing was a lot lower. So carrying on. What is more, rising admissions for respiratory illnesses and sadly deaths are what you would expect to happen at this time of year as you head into autumn and winter, when these viruses always spread more. Some years are worse than others. In 2017 to 2018, there were 50,000 extra deaths over winter compared to the rest of the year, mainly because of the cold weather, a virulent strain of flu and an ineffective vaccine. So here's going to be a photo of the deaths in winter this year and previous years. So as you can see, around the winter kind of period, especially in 2018, there were 50,000 extra deaths, and they have, as you can see, they're predicting a lot more deaths for this winter. So we'll see what happens there. So in fact, Professor Rob Dingwall, a sociologist and advisor to the government, believes the public may well be at the stage where it is comfortable with the idea that thousands will die from COVID, just as they are that die from flu. He believes it is only a particular element of the public health and scientific leadership who worry about driving down the infection level, and it's critical of politicians for not being brave enough to be honest with the public that the virus will be around forever and a day, even with a vaccine. So what's the risk of loosening our grip? The problem of relying on hospital admissions is where you can find yourself behind the curve. Hospital cases are a result of infections from a few weeks back, so if they spiral out of control, more draconian measures may be needed than would have been otherwise. So basically the hospital admissions come after what was previously happening. So as you see, they're low at the moment. A few weeks ago they were low, so the hospital admissions will come in a few weeks' time to see if it's actually as bad as we think at the moment. The other issue, says Professor Christina Pagel from the University College London, is long COVID. The patients who struggle months after an infection says it would be irresponsible to allow the virus to spread, and it's less than a year old, and we're still not certain of what the long-term risks are. She also says if infection rates go up in younger, healthier groups, it will be difficult from keeping it spilling over into more vulnerable ones. Professor Mark Woolhouse, an expert in infectious disease at Edinburgh University, agrees this is a risk, but he argues the government must carefully balance the harms of COVID with the consequences that come from trying to contain it. He says there is already growing evidence the cure has been worse than the disease because of the wider societal costs. The death toll has undoubtedly been terrible. More than 40,000 deaths are linked to COVID. The burden of those fallen on the very old. The average age of death has been over 80. So here is a photo with the mortality rates from 2001 to 2020. So, and if you look at the age-adjusted mortality rates, which take into account the size and age of the population, you can see that while 2020 has undoubtedly been a bad year compared to recent years, which has been seen in terms of people dying, it's not completely out of sync with recent history. Is it comparable with what happened in the 2000s? So yeah, it seems that in total there has been a downward trend, but it has started to go up, as you can see from the little bit at the end. And as you can see, so how can the vulnerable be protected? Professor Wilhouse says lockdown simply deferred the problem, but did have the benefit of buying time, which he thinks could now be used to better protect the vulnerable. That means intensive targeting of testing at care homes to prevent the virus from getting in. 4 in 10 deaths have been among care home residents. Similar steps will be taken to protect frail people who receive care in their own homes. Beyond that, Professor Wilhouse says what is needed is a chain of trust, whereby more care is taken when you have contact with an individual who is higher at risk. Then, he says, may mean not seeing them if you think you've been in busy places where you may have been exposed. And naturally, people in higher risk groups will see themselves being taken more precautions than those who are not, something that simply was not happening in February and March until the extent that the spread of the virus was released. This should be a consideration, many health experts say, from the age of 50 and upwards, but of course it should be proportionate with the risk. While it starts going up at 50, it is still very slim, but then it rises directly with age, which is quite unusual for an infectious disease. Perhaps the easiest way to understand it is to consider this. An infection with the virus essentially doubles your risk of death that you face in any given year from injury or illness. The older and more unhealthy you are, the higher the risk on both counts. The other fact to consider is that doctors are in a much better position to treat severe illness. 2 steroid treatments have been found to reduce the risk of death in seriously ill, which, while much have been learned about how COVID behaves, which means hospitals will be better prepared for problems such as blood clots and kidney damage. What about herd immunity? Allowing or perhaps accepting some spread also brings on to perhaps the most contentious point, immunity. There is great hope a vaccine will be developed, but what if it isn't? Or what if it does not trigger a strong enough immune response in the older age groups? You are then reliant on getting enough people vaccinated to create herd immunity. Will they do this for a vaccine that's being produced so quickly to protect them against a virus that's unlikely to cause complications? The other way immunity develops is through exposure. Like other coronaviruses, all the evidence on COVID points to infections giving people some immunity, then wanes, but it is followed by reinfections that cause milder illnesses. Over the years, this is likely to lead to coronavirus becoming just another of the seasonal virus we experience every year. Although, as always, that needs to be caveated with the fact that this is a new virus, so scientists are learning more about it all the time. The process could take years, even decades, some think, but others are more optimistic. Professor Sanatra Gupta of Oxford University believes there may well be more immunity already than we think because of a combination of natural immunity, more exposure than screening suggests. She thinks that the antibody markers that are relied on to identify previous exposure are not so reliable with this particular virus. She says allowing young and healthy people to be exposed over the winter will be of benefit in years to come. This is how we have always managed these viruses. Why is this so different? If we keep introducing restrictions and lockdowns while we wait for a vaccine, it will be the young that suffer the most, particularly those from more deprived backgrounds. We can't keep doing this, it will be an injustice. So that's it. I hope you found this video very interesting and helpful. If so, please do leave a like and subscribe and any comments in the description. So yeah, thanks guys. If you have any particular questions, do leave them in the description and I will try to get them back to you as quick as possible. If you have any particular video ideas or anything like that, I'll go on to it. At the moment, I am just kind of doing on direct coronavirus news, but as you've seen from 2 of my other videos, they are starting to go into more other news and also discussions. So if you want that kind of video, please let me know. Once again, thank you and goodbye.